Okay, everyone, thank you so much. Can people on Zoom, can you hear us? Can someone write in the chat if you can hear? Thank you. Okay, great. So thank you all for coming to today's event. Where are you? This is Adela. She is an Israel activist, published author, and she is also a 1L at Cardozo. In 2019, Adela sued NYU under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act for failing to protect Jewish students from discrimination. Her case prompted the executive order to include Jewish students in Title VI protections. Her work from political advocacy to interfaith peace rallies has been recognized by national and international organizations, earning her designation as a Broom and Allen Fellow, a Profile Woman 30 Under 30, and Jewish Week 36 Under 36, 50 Most Influential Pro-Israel Leaders of 2021, and most recently, Top 40 Jewish Leaders of Latin America. Adela, proudly a Syrian Lebanese Jew, born in Mexico City, Mexico, and raised in Deal, New Jersey. Without further ado, Adela.
There's a microphone if you guys want me to mic. Yes, no? Okay, great. So hi everyone, it's nice to see a lot of familiar faces. So thank you for coming out to hear my story. So I'm Adela. I was born in Mexico City. My family is originally from Syria and from Lebanon. We moved to Deal, New Jersey, that has a small Syrian Jewish community. And I grew up my entire life in Jewish school. I went to Hillel Yeshiva. So Judaism was always a very big part of my life, and Israel was always a very big part of my Jewish identity. I always heard about anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism on campuses, but I never thought that I'd be confronted with it. When I first got to NYU, I said Judaism's great, but it's not who I'm going to be in college. You know, Judaism is always going to be part of my life. I'm always going to, eat kosher meat. I'm always going to go home for Shabbat, but I don't want it to be my defining factor. So I had a radio show. I joined my hall council. I joined a sorority. I didn't live in the Jewish dorm. I really just wanted to branch out as much as I could. One day I was walking through Washington Square Park, and there were a group of upperclassmen who I'd never really met before, and they had Israeli flags, and I was just walking through, so they gave me a flag, and I'm Jewish, so I took it. And then they got in a circle, and I got in a circle with them, and they started talking about people who lost their lives in a terror attack earlier that week. This was in the fall of 2015, and there were bus bombings almost every 2 to 3 weeks in Israel. And I stood there with these complete strangers. I said, how did I go from a yeshiva, where Judaism was such a big part of my life, to not even knowing that people my age died in Israel doing something that I could have been doing, volunteering? So I sang Hatikva in the circle, and I decided I'm not going to look for a cause to fight for if I already have my own. And I decided to just get involved in this group. By the end of my freshman year, I was vice president. By my sophomore year, I was president. And by my junior year, I was representing Jewish students on student government. Now, NYU, as you know, has a really sizable Jewish community. We have a kosher cafeteria. We have, again, a dorm that's predominantly Jews. We have a campus in Tel Aviv. And for the most part, the Jewish community has always been very comfortable. A lot of people joke that NYU is NYJ. So really, we didn't have any issues, but somehow in 2018, all eyes turned to Israel-Palestine on campus. And it started off with one mention of Zionism in the same category as fascism, Nazism, and racism. And the Jewish community saw this, and we were taken aback. And we wrote to, the senator that drafted the letter, and we said, hey, we saw your letter putting Zionism in this category, and, we just want to talk to you about it. And she said, I said what I said, and I don't talk to fascists. So the Jewish community got together, all 17 Jewish clubs at NYU, and together we drafted a letter that wasn't calling anyone out, wasn't angry. All it was disappointed and explanatory, saying that as Jewish people, we feel this is intrinsically tied to our identity, at least for the majority of our community. And putting it in the same category as Nazism of all things is something that's deeply offensive to a lot of us. And the statement was beautiful, it was ready to go. And right before we published it, I was approached by a mentor of mine who asked me if I really wanted to do that. He said, do you really want to start a war? And I said, what do you mean? I said, look, how many people actually saw this statement, right? It's some statement made by some council, drafted by some students. If you draw attention to this, aren't you just going to start something? If their narrative is the big, scary, crazy Zionists don't like minority groups, then why would you draw attention to that by calling them out? And I thought about it for a long time, and I was president of Realize Israel, I was on student government, I was vice president of the Jewish sorority. So at this point, I really did have all of the power, and I made the unilateral decision not to publish the statement. Until this day, it's my only regret. Because after that, 2 weeks later, the first thing we had was on our student government, a resolution against the NYU Tel Aviv campus that we have. So in most schools, BDS, the Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions movement, is, usually just metaphorical, it's just making a statement. It doesn't actually have any teeth. But because at NYU, we actually have a campus in Tel Aviv, boycotting our Tel Aviv campus would have repercussions for our visiting professors, for anyone studying theology, for anyone studying antiquities, and for anyone who's studying tech and startups. So this resolution actually meant a lot. 2 weeks after that, we had a coalition of 53 student groups that boycott not only Israel, the country, but Realize Israel, the group I was president of. And that took it from this political, ideological boycott against the country to a student-on-student boycott. And I brought it down to a student affairs level. Throughout this process, I kept meeting with the vice president of student affairs at NYU about things that were rising in the Jewish community. I said, we're starting to feel afraid, and we're starting to feel like something's starting. He kept asking, what do you want us to do about this? This isn't a student affairs issue. This is, just students on students. It's not really like we can get involved. And I said, for now, just keep this on your radar because I feel like this is going to become something bigger. And this went on for a couple of months. At that point, every event that we hosted would be widely protested. They started posting pictures of Jewish students on Facebook, calling them the fascists of the week. They made statements to our NYU newspapers saying that Zionists should never feel comfortable on campus. Now, all of this is freedom of speech. That's true. But then came the rave in the park. So every year at NYU, we got together, we'd rent out Washington Square Park, and we had this huge party celebrating Israel Independence Day. Usually students bus in from the university, people come from local high schools, and it really is about 300 to 400 kids at a time. So give and take throughout the whole day, about 700 students, just sitting there wrapped in Israeli flags, feeling proud of who they are. Every year my mom comes. Again, I'm from Syria and Lebanon. My mom and I were from Mexico City. And when she comes every year, she looks at these kids in Israeli flags in the middle of Manhattan in New York, and she says, this is Judaism in the 21st century. This is what it's like to be a proud Jew. This is not being afraid of showing who you are. But that year I knew it would be different. And I told the school I was worried for student safety. I said, with everything that's been happening in the Jewish community and the Israel-Palestine world on campus, I'm really afraid for the Jewish students. And the school again told me I was overreacting. They had sent me to every department. I'd done my legwork from student affairs to Center of Multicultural Education, to Center for Student Life, to student conduct, to public safety, back to student affairs. Everyone had heard my name. Everyone had heard that there's something going on at NYU, that this girl Adela wants to talk about anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, wants to talk about rising tensions. And at the rave in the park, lo and behold, this amazing, beautiful event that's usually a show of Jewish pride. The first thing that happens when the student comes to the front with an Israeli flag and just lights it on fire, throws it on the ground and lets it burn. We continued. We said, okay, that's not ideal, but let's just keep it going. While we were singing Hatikva, which is the Israeli national anthem, another student who was actually in multiple classes, comes to the middle of the circle, grabs a microphone from a Jewish girl, shoves her and starts yelling Free Palestine. I was more afraid for his safety at that point than anyone else's, because he's in the middle of a circle of people who are feeling threatened. Thank God NYPD got in there and was able to pull him out before anything happened. After that, they took our 10-foot Israeli flag, tore it to shreds, and hung it from trees and lampposts throughout Washington Square Park. So you have this event that usually brings tears to your eyes, with the leaves vibrating with the energy of Jews singing Hatikva, and instead you have our flag burnt hanging from trees and a Jewish girl physically assaulted. So at this point, I went back to the school and I said, I'm not overreacting. NYPD got involved. They arrested 2 students for attacking other students. What are you doing about this? And the school told me, you know what, you're right. You're right. We're going to do something about this, but we don't want to do it publicly. We don't want any public narrative about NYU taking sides. So we're going to act behind the scenes. Just keep this out of the press. And I very naively complied. Again, it was my unilateral decision. My community was scared and angry, and they were trusting me, and I decided to trust the school. And I told the school from the beginning, my community is scared and angry, so I'm trusting you to act and to do the right thing. Like I said, I was on student government. I can talk about it later if you want, but After a series of events, I decided to step down from my position. My position was not filled by a Jewish student. So after I left, there was no longer a Jewish representative on student government to represent the Jewish community at large. I had left the Middle Eastern Studies department. I was a Middle Eastern Studies major at the time, and not a single student would partner with me. I'd walk into my class, most of which I was the only Jewish student, and no one would want to be part of my final projects. They would stare at me in the Regina George moment of I'd walk in and they'd just say, that's the Zionist. At one point, I started getting so many threats online that NYU had to give me security for 3 days. And it got so bad that my professor approached me and said, if you don't feel comfortable coming to class, I will meet with you outside of class, but you don't even have to take your final exams in the same room as anyone else. And there was one girl who stepped up, not Jewish, woman of color, who decided to be my partner for a final project. She started being boycotted and she took her final exams in the room with me. After that, I left the Middle Eastern Studies department. My senior year, I left my position on Realize Israel. I left student government. I left everything I was doing. I was taking creative writing and dance because I just wanted to graduate. I didn't want to be that Israel girl anymore. I didn't want to be that Jewish girl anymore. I didn't want to walk into a room where I knew I was hated. So I did take world dance and postmodern dance and all these classes that really just to fill up my schedule before I graduated. And about 2 months before I graduated, NYU decided to come out with their President's Service Award for 2019. The President's Service Award is the highest honor that you can get as a group at NYU. And that year they decided to give it to none other than Students for Justice in Palestine, the group that had taken responsibility for everything that had happened over the last 2 years to the Jewish community. And at first I thought it was funny. So when people started texting me about it, they're like, did you see the award? And I was like, yeah, LOL, typical. And someone else texted me and I'm like, yeah, I know, I saw, I can't believe it. It wasn't until a couple of friends called me and they're like, you have to do something about this. And I said, look, I did my part. I gave 2 years, 3 years of my life to this. I'm ready to graduate in 2 months. I think I'm taking a step back. And they said, well, can you at least get us a meeting with the vice president? You're the only one that has the connections there. And I said, sure, I'll see what I can do. So I start making calls and the vice president dodges me. Head of Student Affairs dodges me. Head of Center of Multicultural Student Life dodges me. Student Conduct won't pick up the phone. Public Safety keeps me on hold. Start calling Vice President of Student Affairs, who is the highest contact I have. Start calling him almost every 2 hours. His secretary keeps telling me he's busy. After about a week of trying with phone calls, I went to his office physically. At this point, I felt it was personal. And I sat outside his door on the floor. And his secretary said, look, Adela, he's very busy. I said, I'm sure he is. I need to talk to him. He said, Lo, he's very busy. And I said, again, I get it. I'm going to wait here. He's like, well, can you at least sit on a chair? I said, no, I'm going to wait on the floor. Until he comes out of his door, I'm going to sit right here. Took him about 45 minutes, but he finally came out. He was like, look, Adela, I'm just really busy. And I was like, no, please, this award, my community would just, and he's like, no, Adela, like, please, I'm very busy. I'm like, well, can you just meet with me? He's like, look, how about you meet with me the first week of May? This is in the last week of February. So I said, first week of May. Can't meet with me for 2-3 months. He said, no, I'm just very busy. First week of May, which also happened to be the week of my graduation. So I walked out of there and I realized the school doesn't want to change anything. The school doesn't care about making a difference. The school doesn't care about the Jewish community feeling scared. They just want me to graduate because they know that I'm the only person that's going to go through the goose chase for 3 years to get a meeting. So I took a step back and I wondered what I could do. I spoke to the Jewish community at large. I spoke to my right hand, my left hand, to everyone who had taken over the positions after I left. And we got in touch with lawyers. And we asked if we had a case against the school. And they explained to me that Title VI of the Civil Rights Act is meant to prevent discrimination. It means that every academic institution has the obligation to prevent discrimination from happening, and when it does occur, to take steps from happening again, to remedy it. Title VI is about creating a hostile environment, an environment so hostile that it keeps students from participating in their everyday activities or in activities offered to other students. I said, this sounds exactly like what's happening to the community here. They're like, yes, but it only applies to nationality, ethnicity, and race. It doesn't protect religion. They told me that in some cases, you can maybe make the case that it can apply to some religious groups. I told them I had a paper trail. I said, I've been meeting with these people for 2 years. I have every single meeting, every single email. Is there something we can do? They told me to send it over. About a week later, I get a call back and they tell me, not only do they think I have a case, they have the strongest case they've ever seen for Title VI to protect anti-Semitism and Judaism. They asked me if I was ready to become the face for this, and I thought about it for a long time. Oh, is there anything I need to do? Oh,
People come in the waiting room.
oh, awesome. So they asked me if I was ready to do this, and I said yes. So I called my mom and I was like, Mom, she's like, yes. And I said, I think I'm going to sue NYU. And she was like, huh? And I'm like, yep. She's like, and you're sure about this? I said, yes. I considered all the possible repercussions. I considered the pros and cons, and I realized I really was the only person in the position that can file this suit. I could have filed anonymously, but I was told by my lawyers that a lot of this is going to be about the narrative. They said, because we don't think you're going to win, they told me straight up, you likely won't. This is really going to be about the foot in the door. So I couldn't imagine graduating without filing this big boy grievance. I couldn't imagine graduating and having any NYU student having to go through an ounce of what I went through because I didn't speak up at that point. So I decided to go through with it. And finally, officially, 2 weeks before I graduated, we did file my case with the Office of Civil Rights. We prepared everything to go to press, and it did. And the day that everything was released, April 27th, I get a call to my personal cell phone from the vice president of NYU. How do you get my number? I have no idea. And he's like, hey, Adela, I'm just seeing some articles here, something about some Title VI thing. Can you come to my office? And I was like, very busy. But how about the first week of May? And that was the greatest moment for me, because when I showed up the first week of May, right before my graduation, I didn't show up saying, my community, we're this, we're that, this award. Instead, I showed up with a calendar. And I said, here's every time over the last 2 years that I came to your office and you told me I was overreacting. A Jewish student was assaulted at NYU under your watch, and you told me I was overreacting. You promised me you would do something, and then you didn't. And then to proactively give an award that didn't have to be given, the message you sent was, how do you become a phenomenal group at NYU? How do you become an award winner? You pick a minority community. You target them, you protest their events, you burn their flag, you assault their students, you post pictures of them on social media, and maybe then NYU will consider you worthy of contribution to NYU life enough to get the highest honor at the school. Alarming acts were no longer alarming, they were being celebrated. And Jewish students felt they didn't have a voice. So because he wouldn't give me 20 minutes, he would have to deal with this case, and he would have to deal with the publicity. And I told him when I sat down at his office months before that I'm not an activist, and I still hold by this. There's a difference between advocacy and activism. And it all has to do with the goal of what you're trying to accomplish. An activist reaches out to the overwhelming majority. They're bottom up. They see a table, they want to flip it. Their goal is to change minds by taking the hardest stances. And an activist doesn't give up. An advocate's different. I've been a student government kid since I was in 8th grade, president of my middle school, true story, and in high school, and in college, and now I'm on SPA as a senator at large, which is so on brand. I don't care about flipping the table. I like working through the table. I've never been the kid with the megaphone to make noise. It's never been me. An advocate comes to the table understanding a need for compromise. When I came to the school and told them I was worried for the Jewish community, I said I was worried for all student safety. And that has always been the case. My point wasn't about making statements and taking stances. My issue was with conduct, because had you removed any political affiliation to what happened in Washington Square Park that day, you'd immediately have a case for anything else. Number one, if a French flag was burned at NYU and everyone was saying the French don't belong here and they don't feel safe, a French student would be entitled to tell you, I don't feel safe here. If you could close your eyes for 1 minute and imagine a Jewish student at NYU burning a Palestinian flag, I would immediately kick them out of my group, take a stand against them publicly, saying this is not what we stand for, and I would reach out to every single student that affiliates with Students for Justice in Palestine and ask how I could be a support for them, immediately. If a fraternity burned another fraternity's flag in the middle of Washington Square Park and physically assaulted one of their members, you're telling me that fraternity wouldn't be suspended? And had an LGBTQ flag been burned at NYU, I doubt that NYU would give an award to the group that burned it. So why is it that the only flag that's okay to burn is mine? And that's why I filed my case. I spent the summer making publicity for my case. I spoke on every podcast. I did every interview. I flew around conference to conference, from DC to Denver to LA to Miami. Wherever they wanted me, I was. Because I'm not a US citizen and I didn't yet have a work visa, I had all the free time in the world until I could legally start working. And that's what I did with my summer after college. And one day I got a call, again to my personal cell phone, from a Washington, DC restricted number. And I answered, and turns out it was from the White House. They told me that the president had heard about my case and that he thinks anti-Semitism on college campuses is a very big problem. And it would be his honor if I would stand along his side in a conference in Miami and talk about my case. First thing I said was, I'm not a US citizen and I haven't been for 20 years. I don't even have a green card. They said, we're aware. Said, I don't give pre-written speeches. They said, you can say whatever you want to say. I said, you just want me to talk about my case? They said, yes. And I thought about it for a while because people ask me about the political affiliations. People say, do you really want to stand up there with Cheeto in chief, right? And remember, I'm not American, right? I'm from Mexico. I think the president of Mexico is an idiot. And you can put that on record. I don't admire him at all. If he called me tomorrow and said, anti-Semitism is a problem, can you come talk about it in a national platform? Of course I'm taking it. The Prime Minister of Canada told me, hey, anti-Semitism is a problem. Can you come up and speak about it? Of course I'm saying yes. Same goes if Angela Merkel got my cell phone tomorrow and said, hey, I think anti-Semitism is an issue. Heard you sued NYU. Can you come talk about it? I'm taking that platform. So I took the platform and I spoke at the conference. And about 3 days later, I get another call from the White House thanking me for speaking on stage and informing me that they're going to officially sign an executive order to expand Title VI to include Judaism under its protections. Now, it's not just Judaism that ends up protected, because what this sets is a precedent for all religions that function in this way. Religions that function as ethnic groups, religions where people feel unified, they have a shared ancestry. Religions like Islam and like Hinduism and like Sikhs. These are groups that would not have been protected. Had a hijabi woman been walking on the street and been harassed, unless she'd be able to claim it was for her nationality, her ethnicity, or her race, she would not be protected under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act in her school. And that's ridiculous. And that was one of the greatest moments of my life, because when I spoke up because I didn't want any student at NYU to go through what I went through. But what this executive order did was two things. Number one, it told every Jewish student that their voice matters and that they deserve protection. And number two, it told every university that they have to take Jewish students as seriously as they would take any other group. And now people always talk about the politics. They say, right, but this was Zionism, right? This wasn't your Israel identity. Number one, the overwhelming majority of the Jewish community of NYU was identifying with that as part of their identity. We were in Washington Square Park, not because we're Israeli, because I'm not Israeli. Don't have family in Israel, don't have any family that served. We were in that park because we were celebrating our United Judaism. Of course, not everyone would subscribe to that. Not every Jew is a Zionist, and that's okay. But when the overwhelming majority of the Jewish community feels afraid, you know you have a problem. And this is made most evident by my Arabic class. Because yes, I was the only Jew in the class, and I was also the only Zionist in the class. And no one would partner with me because of that. But if we had a class where you only have white students and one Black girl who supports the Black Lives Matter movement because she feels it's intrinsic to her identity, and every single student refused to partner with her for politics, we would know what to call that. And we would call that racism. So it's not necessarily about the politics. The issue was, again, conduct. Conduct that would have been unacceptable had it happened to anyone else. It was acceptable when it happened to us. And that's why I had to file. I didn't file my case because I was Jewish at NYU. I filed my case because I was Jewish at NYU, and I was being treated differently because of it. And it was my responsibility as an NYU student to file that case. So I learned a lot of things. Let's go back to all the way at the beginning. The first statement that put Zionism in the same category as racism, fascism, and Nazism. I didn't publish the statement because I didn't want to start a war. And within the next 3 months, NYU turned into one of the most hostile campuses for Jewish students in the United States, to the point of a lawsuit that won. That's crazy. And the craziest thing was that I was afraid to draw attention to the issue. And this is a problem with Judaism, because we're the forever nomadic people. We're constantly in host societies. we're not at home. And we're afraid to draw attention to what makes us different, because if we do, then people are going to start to see we're different and then treat us differently. When we're Jews and we get stepped on, we apologize, move over to the side and say, my foot shouldn't have been there in the first place. But Jews belong wherever it is that Jews want to be, because we're people. When we decide when we let other people decide where a Jew can and cannot feel comfortable, that's when you let anti-Semitism win. We say, don't check your identities at the door. Well, why should I have to check part of mine? And that's the biggest lesson I learned. Because had I stood up for myself, odds are all of this would have happened, but at least I would have stood up at the beginning. In a way, I'm glad I didn't, because it serves as a lesson that I was so afraid to raise attention to an issue that ended up happening anyway, because when people want to hate, they're going to hate. So you might as well stand your ground. And it's time that we start claiming space. My case ended up settling after the executive order passed, even though I filed before. So it didn't have any bearing on my case itself. So my case was accepted by the Office of Civil Rights long before I spoke by the president. And when it reached its settlement, it was on the basis of its own merits. And on its own merits, the Office of Civil Rights determined that NYU had allowed a hostile environment and rewarded a hostile environment for my community. And that settlement is now being used as a template for all other schools. After the executive order, UCLA filed their case, Columbia filed their case, Wake Forest is in the process of theirs. Not everyone has to make it to Title VI. I don't recommend taking legal action. It was very difficult. It was a big decision. Needless to say, I love Cardozo, and why you didn't quite want me back. Cardozo, Yeshiva University, saw me as an investment. It closed a lot of doors, but it opened a whole lot more. And I wouldn't change a thing. And with that, I'll open for questions.
Thank you.
Any questions? I'll start with one.
Thank you, Adela. My question is, after hearing you speak, like you completely own your Jewish identity, you wear your Magen David and you're proud. What sort of advice would you give to someone who doesn't feel as comfortable and is trying to grow into their Jewish identity?
I say it's okay to start small. You don't have to jump into everything and suddenly tattoo a big map of Israel onto your chest. You don't have to do that. It's not necessary. But it takes with the small steps. So let's say, for example, in those conversations where you want to say something like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go home for the holiday, or you even want to say something like, oh yeah, I'm gonna visit my cousin from Israel. Any of these things where you find yourself holding back from saying what you actually want to say, it's time to say them. If it causes discomfort, it causes discomfort, but that's the only way to normalize. And that's the only way to make things more acceptable and palatable. So I'd start with the smaller things. Another big thing I think is very important is Jewish education. Again, I had really the privilege of growing up in a Jewish community that was very traditional, and I learned a lot about who I am. It doesn't mean that you have to keep everything, but if you choose one thing that you feel connected to and then you stick to it, it'll work wonders for you. Like for me, saying Berachot before eating food is a tiny thing that I've kept since I was little. And it makes me feel connected. Even if it doesn't matter where I am, I could be traveling in a conference in the middle of Colorado. I still feel like I'm connected to who I am. And I'm very proud of who I am. Another thing I wanted to say, and I forgot to say this before, was about stifling freedom of speech. People always ask me, well, doesn't the executive order stifle freedom of speech? It does not. Why? Because Title VI already exists, right? Title VI already drew the line between freedom of speech and discrimination and harassment. We can make the case that Title VI limits freedom of speech and Title VI should not exist. And I'll gladly have that conversation with you. But if it does exist, it has to include us as well. You can't protect some groups and not protect others. Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously now, the dust is settled and you stand up there and very confident. And I'm sure there were moments that, maybe you weren't as confident or even scared. So what would your advice be in taking action in the face of fear or when you're afraid?
That's a great question. I did face a lot of that. One of the biggest nights for me, for example, one of the main reasons why I left student government was after a town hall meeting. We had a town hall. It was on the English date of Yom HaAtzmaut, May 14th. So the Jewish community really wasn't there. I was the only one. And after the meeting, I was just talking to an administrator and, one student comes and another student comes and a third, and all of these students on student government start amassing, all of them entirely against everything I stand for, not quite fans of me. And at one point, it was just like one circle, the third circle, like the second circle and the third were people on chairs from the top looking down. Everyone had their phone flash in my face. And I don't know how it turned into this mob, but they started just saying disgusting things, calling me intellectually dishonest, telling me that they're so glad that I'm so proud of my Zionism and that I get to speak about it and wear it so proudly, just like every proud Nazi officer. Because then that way, not even I can hide from who I am when I realize I'm on the wrong side of history. That was just one of the things that were said. This went on for maybe about 20 minutes. I remember I was talking to an administrator at the time, the vice president of student affairs. When he saw this group amassing, he said, I have to go, and he ducked out and he left me there. There were other administrators in the room as this was happening, and this was entirely recorded. I can't tell you how long I was there because my mind completely blanked. And a Muslim Turkish student, who ended up being president of the student government, not a fan of me either. Thank God for her. She hopped in the middle of the circle and she said, guys, there's a lot of us, there's one of her. This isn't the time. She grabbed my wrist and she pulled me out. When she pulled me out, I really was kind of like numb. I didn't know what was going on. And I just like got on the phone and I called the vice president and realized Israel, he was my right hand, one of my best friends. And I was talking to him, trying to tell him what had happened. And he was like, where are you? Where are you? And I didn't even realize my legs had stopped working. I was about a block north of Washington Square Park, right here on the floor. Couldn't even talk. Just felt like I was dry heaving. Never had a panic attack like that before in my life. I never felt small before, but in that circle, when I had everyone just looking down at me, I felt like an ant. I felt like I was getting squashed. I'd never felt that before. Realize Israel, they were all celebrating Yom Ha'atzmaut. They all came to find me. No one knew where I was. They found me on the floor. They physically peeled me off the sidewalk. And they were like, oh, like we should go celebrate Yom Ha'atzmaut. And I was like, I need to go home. They're like, yeah, we'll have wine night. Like we'll do the girls. And I was like, I need to go home and be by myself. And that was the day I decided to leave student government. But what I did realize was that throughout every step of the way, even though I was the face, even though I was a student government mouthpiece, even though I was a president, end of the day, I always had everyone behind me. It was hard because everyone was behind me and I was the one in front. And that means that I got the brunt of the force. But end of the day, I always knew that if I fell, they'd have me. And they did. So what do you do when you're faced with intimidation is make sure that you have a support system. There's so many students, not only at this school, but throughout the entire country who can be a support system. If you're ever feeling alone, especially like with social media, this, whatever, there's always a group of students that stand behind you. And that's the first thing that you need to find because it gives you your safe space. It also reminds you that you're not insane. Because I started thinking maybe I am. Maybe they're right. Maybe I shouldn't be so proud of who I am. But I know the right thing in my heart. At one point, NYU did give me security for 3 days, just because, and especially after the Trump appearance, that I started getting not only death threats from the left, but from the right. Started getting a lot of Zionist horror. I started getting a lot of Jew-esque infiltrating politics. I've gotten all the anti-Semitic tropes that you could possibly imagine. Actually, on student government, one of the reasons why I left too, which was very funny, was there was the guy who was the treasurer of student government voted against BDS. He didn't even vote against, he abstained against BDS. He was a friend of mine because we were both in Greek life. Other than our student government interactions, I'd never really spoken to him outside of that. And the ongoing meme that they were sending around every group chat was like a picture of a jar and like it's like guess the candy. So instead I said, guess how many times a week Adela has to blow a mic for him to be a Zionist. At first I was like, how low do they think of me that they think that that's the only way that I can communicate with people? But how highly do they think of me that they think I have that power? Oh, nice. No, it was bizarre. It really got very ad hoc. It got very ad hoc and very personal. But again, my support system was amazing. Not only my friends, but my brother. So he's been with me throughout. Any other questions?
Yeah, were there ever any moments of optimism you had throughout NYU in terms of bridging the gap with the other side?
Yeah, so I love NYU. So I wanted to go to NYU since I was in 4th grade. I was an NYU pre-college ambassador. I went when I was in 10th grade and 11th grade. My brother went to NYU. Once I did get to NYU, I joined every council I could, had my NYU radio show. I bleed purple, which is why it's so hard to look out these windows every day at those flags waving. But I did love every moment at NYU. I loved the entirety of the Jewish community at NYU was always by my side. Every single rave in the park, except for the last one that went awry, were those moments of pride where I said, this is amazing and this is home. And I did love it. And it was great. It was really great.
In terms of more of just like bridging the gap with the pro-Palestinian side, like was there ever moments where you saw there was an opportunity for actual dialogue?
Actually, one of my weirdest moments, I say. So when things got very bad after the rave before the rave in the park, we kept telling the school they had to do something, and they flew in a professional mediator. She's solved gang conflicts, government conflicts. She's a professional lady. They flew in, and they brought her in to have this professionally mediated dialogue between the activist community and the Jewish community. And we're talking the Jewish community. Now, it wasn't just Realize Israel. Like, there was like every single, like the religious group, the Kesher, like every group was there, and the activist community. And it started off with the mediator saying why we need to talk about, what's the difference between dialogue and debate. And the other side stood up and said, well, we're not looking for dialogue or debate. We don't want to be here. And after about 2 hours of going back and forth, the mediator just looked at the administrators and was like, I can't do this. Like, this is going to fail. At one point, everyone started yelling at each other until a Palestinian student stood up and he said, this is bullshit. And this is bullshit because I'm the only Palestinian in this room and I want them to hear what I have to say. I want them to listen to me. I want them to hear my story. I want them to know about my family. And I'm the only Palestinian here. He was actually in 2 of my classes. And we said, we want to hear you. Tell us. And the rest of the community, who have no personal stake, started yelling at him to sit down. That was a crazy moment for me. And that's when I realized this is all politics that has nothing to do with it. What I actually ended up studying at NYU, because I couldn't do Middle Eastern politics, I built my own major. I studied Middle Eastern diaspora structures. And what does that mean? I studied the movement of bodies. Physically, as in migration patterns, I studied difference, what it means to assimilate, what it means to integrate. Which communities assimilate, which ones integrate, what it means to maintain your core, what traditions are preserved, what traditions are left behind. What does it mean to be a diaspora, to be a group, but to be elsewhere? I studied tribal politics. I studied Greek life. I studied sports. All of these things that somehow you pick a side and now you're die hard on it, because that's what happened in that room that day, where a voice wanted us to hear him and he was silenced by his own people that wanted him to apparently have a platform. So that was my moment of hope. Of course, it didn't end super well. He actually is the one that went on to make all the statements about how we shouldn't feel safe at NYU. He was the first person to drop my partnership in my Arabic class. And after that, it all snowballed. But for a split second there, he wanted us to hear him. And we all wanted to hear what he had to say. I wish that things could have played out differently that day. Any other questions?
Yeah, so how has this case impacted your decision to pursue a law career? Or if not, and then what's your plan in the future? Do you plan to study, do you plan to work or hope to work in constitutional law or continue in your, I don't want to say the wrong thing, advocacy or advocate.
I use both now, but
Use the phrase wrong, but what do you hope to accomplish with your law degree?
That's a great question. So after I graduated, I started working full-time in Israel activism on campuses for an organization that supports students directly, because I felt that I couldn't do anything else other than help students that were in my position, be the crutch that I didn't have. So I did that for 2 years. I always knew law school was on the horizon, but I didn't know exactly when. And then TikTok happened. And TikTok became everything. So suddenly when I was talking to campuses, it wasn't like there's this resolution or there's this statement or there's this where Adela can just fly in, inspire the students, help them craft a response. Instead, it was a TikTok made in LA, went viral at ASU and sent it to someone in FAU. And now it's gone viral in Berkeley. And I don't know how to fight that kind of anti-Semitism or anti-Zionism or whatever it is you want to call it. I don't know how to fight the social media war. I'm not useful there. I don't know how to make a counter TikTok. I don't think it's smart to argue with people in the comments because no one's reading it. And it just got to the point that all the problems I was being called in to do damage control on, I just didn't feel useful anymore. And I said, I have to reassess. I have to completely reassess. And I started thinking, how does change happen? And I think activism is great, and there's a lot of great activists out there. That's not me. I'm the advocate. So what did I actually do? My change wasn't through activism. My change was through the law. It was by working on the table. So maybe it's time I get back to that, what I do best. So that's when I decided it's time to apply to law schools. My goal is to pursue religious liberties. I think that right now religion is being used as a scapegoat, not just Judaism, every religion. I've had friends that are Hindu come up to me and say, like, when I talk to people, they're like, it must have been so hard to grow up in your community. Like, they totally don't support women. And they're like, what? Of course, religion has some drawbacks. And of course, every community has drawbacks. But to have outsiders somehow demonize it, and not just mine, I see a growing pattern. And I'm not just going to stand up when it's Judaism that's attacked. Like I said, like the Title VI case, whether or not you like Trump, he did something good. It's about time they protect Jews, and it's about time they protect every other religious group. So that's what I hope to dedicate myself to. Nonprofit work for the rest of my life, hopefully. And I've gotten to work with a lot of great organizations between Brandeis Center, Lawfare Project, you name it. I've been there, left and right. I've worked with J Street U, I worked with COA. But it's time I step out of my Jewish bubble, and it's time I actually start doing some good work.
Well, we're happy to have you here.
Thank you, I'm so happy to be here.
I think you've already done some good work too, for sure, so, thank you.
Sky's the limit, so.
We had a question on Zoom also.
I have a question on Zoom. If you want, you can unmute yourself. I don't know if we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
They were just.
Okay, I hope I'm not like screaming at you guys. First of all, thank you for sharing this. This is such an important perspective and story to share. I hope that you continue to do so the rest of your life. And I really appreciate your ideas about advocacy versus activism as well. But my question is, are you feeling supported as a Jewish woman at Cardozo? And how can students who are Jewish or not Jewish support and be an ally?
Well, that's a great question. I really like that. I do feel supported at Cardozo through the people I've met. I'm going to talk in this direction because I think that this is where the camera is. Where's it? The camera's here. Yes? Okay, I'm just going to keep going and talking to you.
Good enough.
I have felt supported because I've met some really amazing people. I also, when it comes to the Jewish question, I never realized the difference between a school that accommodates Jews and a school that's designed around Jews. So at NYU, if you had Yom Kippur class, your teacher would say, oh, you can have an excused absence. And I'd be like, wow, NYU is so great. And here, suddenly, I don't have to choose between going home from the holidays and having this excused absence and making up the work. Instead, it really is designed. Or like even like during orientation, they were passing around like appetizers and everything was catered and so nice and everyone had champagne during the reception. And then I was like, I can eat this. Like they have meat appetizers that I can eat. And that was crazy to me because it's something I didn't really have before at NYU. As strong as our Jewish community was there, the school wasn't built around that. So I've been really enjoying being in an environment where I feel fully safe. Now, as to how to be an ally and support women, I think it's important to talk to women. So, you know, if anyone here is not a woman, please talk to women, ask how we're doing. And if you are women, remember to stand together because like I said, support system is the most important thing that you can have. Any other questions? I think I saw one in this direction.
Sorry, I don't think I conveyed my question well enough. I didn't just mean how to support women, but I meant how to support and be an ally to our Jewish friends and to the Jewish community.
Oh, wonderful. Oh, that's even better. So as you know, Judaism has a lot of different restrictions. So there's a lot of things that are hard to explain. So for example, like when a teacher wants to host a makeup session and they want to do it on Friday afternoon, even if they're gonna end by 4 p.m., that's very hard for Jewish students. And here we have a very large amount of Jewish students. So I think that one of the best ways to be an ally is to understand that some things that might seem as annoyances are actually a very big deal to us. So like you might say like, oh, it's so annoying. We have a Wednesday on a Thursday again. Why do we have this? Like understand how much it means to us. And I think that that's like a very big deal because I've heard like a lot of people like talking around being like, oh, I don't get it. Why can't we just, or like, why can't the building be open on Saturdays? And like all these things that seem as annoyances, like, okay, it's a Jewish holiday on Tuesday, but why can't we come to the library? Like, again, all these things kind of make us feel like we should step back and maybe we should start catering to the outside. But this is one of the only schools in the world, really, like outside of Israel, really, it's the only where we shouldn't feel like we have to apologize for our needs being accommodated for, because it's Yeshiva University. So I think like one of the biggest ways to be an ally to Jewish students at Cardozo is to realize that maybe Cardozo does things differently. Maybe we start earlier than other schools. Maybe we start later than other schools, but it's all done for a reason and it's all very intentional. And even saying something like, it's so annoying that we can't have class after 4 on Friday because I have so many makeup classes next Tuesday and it's just annoying they're tacking it on. It makes us feel like we have to apologize for that too. And it's, again, I hate using the word microaggression because I wouldn't consider it an aggression, but it is one of those things that do linger. So be a little bit more careful with speech and understand why the school does certain things. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure this could be a whole conversation in and of itself, but it does. Thank you.
And also, I don't know if you heard, but there was a comment at some point made about how JLSA wasn't aware of certain issues, and someone started something along the lines of, does that say more about JLSA than the issues? And that's offensive. Don't lump people into categories. And I don't other people. I make it like it's a they, them. Don't make it like it's a group. Like, oh, the Jewish students do this. It's like we're all students here together. We're all peers. So I would just say avoid othering. Any other questions? Okay, with that, I think we're also almost at time. It's 6:52, so we have 8 minutes.
I have another question. I love hearing you talk. I'm wondering, so after this lawsuit, what other sort of backlash have you faced and how have you been dealing with it? And how has this affected your life?
So on a personal level, a couple of things. So at NYU, of course, like the social repercussions were very specific in that, there was a whole department boycotting me. That's not quite nice. Didn't feel great. Specifically after the executive order, because I did stand on stage with Trump, that's when I lost a ton of followers on Instagram, girls that were in my sorority, like people who thought I was standing for certain things when really I was using a platform. And that was a little bit difficult. But I think the hardest thing for me was, remember the mentor that told me not to publish the letter when I wanted to publish, when the whole community came together to write a letter? So they did not want me to file any case. So when the whole community approached me and they told me they wanted me to file, and I was sure, again, I checked with like all these Jewish students and they're all like, you're the only one, please. I knew that he wouldn't be on board. And this is an administrator at NYU who I considered a very close ally, a really close mentor. So I filed my case without telling them and put everything in the works. And before we went to press, I called up this Jewish organization that I was very close to. I told them, by the way, just so you're not blindsided, I filed my case. I filed my case with the support of the students. Just so you know how to deal with the backlash, it's going to press tomorrow. And they were on the phone with me. He looped in his vice president, his assistant. I had about 4 adults because I was 22 and scared. I had about 4 adults on the phone with me for 2 hours telling me that I just set off a nuclear bomb. They're like, you don't even know what you just did. Look how good we have it at NYU. We have a kosher cafeteria that's a full restaurant. We have a dorm full of Jewish students. We have one of the strongest Jewish centers in the entire country. We have a campus in Tel Aviv, and you have the audacity to stand up and say that NYU wasn't protecting Jewish students, they went on and on and on, and I was hysterical crying on the other end, not saying a single word. They said, you don't know what you just did to the Jewish community at NYU. Because if anything, you just destroyed it. And I hung up on that phone, and my brother was with me on the couch, and he was like, I was like, what did I do? I shouldn't have done this. I shouldn't have done this. And I went back, and my brother's like, look, you knew that was going to be their opinion because they're school administrators. They are paid by the school to foster Jewish life at NYU. And if Jewish students are feeling scared, guess what? That means they're not doing their job, and it reflects poorly on them. So of course they don't want you to go to press. Again, my issue isn't with NYU having a kosher cafeteria. That is wonderful. My issue is that a Jewish girl was assaulted and NYU did nothing. When you say something like, yeah, he hits me, but look at the beautiful purse he got me, that's an abusive relationship. We weren't looking to have all these amazing bells and whistles that other schools don't have. We were looking for the most basic protection for one of our students. We were looking to be heard. And it took me a very long time to be able to get out of that mindset and keep reminding myself, I did the right thing. And that was the worst backlash I could face because it came from within. It came from someone who was supposed to be a support system. And instead they made me feel like I was doing something so terrible I could never walk away from. It was very hard. Other than that, again, there's been backlash back and forth, but for the most part, I think I've learned how to deal with it. Nothing surprises me anymore. I represent the Jewish youth at the United Nations for 2 years, and got a lot of backlash there too, from the kind of anti-Semitism I wasn't used to in the US. And that was eye-opening. Like when I realized how the US is wonderful, because at least we're not at the point where France is. At least we're not at the point where it's the first time someone's meeting a Jewish person. Which brings me to probably my closing point since we're running out of time. Everyone always asks me how they can fight anti-Semitism in any way. And I think that the strongest way to fight it is through Jewish pride and by being yourself fully wherever you are and showing what intersectionality actually is, which is I can be everything I am and it doesn't discount any other part of who I am. It's the most important thing. And every interaction that you have with someone, think it might be the first time that they actually speak to someone who's Jewish. We always say in Greek life, you're always wearing your letters, right? That's what life is. Every identity that you represent, you have to wear with pride. And we have in Judaism the concept of Kiddush Hashem, which is like honoring the name of God through your actions. They always told you this when you were in elementary school and you were walking through the museum and all the kids were being loud and like throwing things and you're like, guys, Kiddush Hashem. Remember, you're representing the Jewish community right now. And if you, a middle schooler or second grader, throws a water bottle in a museum, you are defaming the name of God. And maybe it's wrong to tell that to a second grader, but they ingrained it into me. And that's why every action that I take with pride. Every action that I take, I stand behind. I try to watch the way I speak. I try to watch who I speak to about certain things. And I try to always be respectful because I'm way more than just me. Everyone here is way more than just them. You represent something bigger. So don't be ashamed of it and make sure to do it justice. And that's it. You guys can like stand up and walk around now.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Adela.
Thank you so much. That was great. Thanks for doing the cupcakes.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, competition Saturday.
Thanks for coming.
Listen, yeah, I can.
Yes.
Around it. I'm not sure if that will look.
Okay.